A Chicopee man mourning the sudden loss of his beloved dog.
The dog became ill after contracting a deadly disease often found in puddles. Western Mass News has more on the story.
This time was particularly hard because he was so young, and it was so sudden.
Joseph Martin tells Western Mass News his dog Winter was healthy until he noticed blood in his urine last week. Veterinarians diagnosed the 5-year-old rescue with leptospirosis. He passed away 3 days later. Martin tells us he believes his dog contracted the bacterial disease from a puddle in his backyard. We looked into it and found that leptospirosis, or lepto, can be passed to dogs through urine, rodent-contaminated garbage, or in contaminated water like puddles. Lepto symptoms in dogs can include high fever, bloody urine, vomiting, weakness, or diarrhea. In mild cases, lepto can be treated with antibiotics, but in more serious cases like Winter's, dogs may require IV treatments, which can be costly.
And they told us he had leptospirosis, and it wasn't a ton they could do. The treatment would be extremely expensive.
His advice to other dog owners?
The thing would be vaccinate your dogs against leptospirosis, and also just when they're outside on walks or in the backyard, keep a very close eye on them.
Western Mass News reached out to multiple animal hospitals in the area, including Martin's vet, and they tell us lepto can be prevented with a vaccine.
Multiple vets in the area tell me lepto can be passed on to humans, and you should always use gloves when caring for a sick pet. Reporting in studio, Maria Wilson, Western Mass News.